Welcome to The Thought Card, a podcast about travel and money, where planning, saving, and creativity leads to affording travel, building wealth, and paying off debt. We are the Financially Savvy Travelers. Hey, Financially Savvy Travelers, welcome to another episode of The Thought Card podcast. Today, we have a very special guest. His name is Christopher Mitchell. He is a Canadian travel writer, photographer, and podcaster who has traveled to over 80 countries and 5 continents. He has lived in Norway, South Korea, and most recently Turkey for 3 years. He now calls Toronto home. He also co-hosts the podcast Rick Steves Over Brunch with Stephanie Craig. Christopher Mitchell is also the author of A Local Travel Writer's Guide to Toronto, an insider's travel guide to visiting Toronto, Canada. And this book covers restaurants, nightlife, attractions, events, and more. So welcome to the Thought Card podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I hope I can live up to that bio. That sounds like a pretty good bio. So I better live up to it, right?
Yes, you got me at 80 countries. I was like, wow, 80 countries. I'm at 27 right now, and I'm feeling pretty good. But 80 is amazing, and I'm sure a lot of the audience aspires to travel to see so much of the world.
I think it's just an attestation to how long travel's been a part of my life, and I sort of started early, and I don't see that passion for travel dissipating anytime soon. So I mean, it's one of those things. I think also that's shifted over time. You know, that focus on that number. I think when I was younger, I was like I want to see as much as I can, and now I'm a lot more interested in just making sure I take the time to see places properly. But grateful to have all those experiences, and hopefully I can leverage some of those experiences today for all the listeners.
Yes. All right. So let's start from the beginning. When you were 16, you spent a month in Dublin participating in a writing program at Trinity College. So how did that trip impact you eventually moving abroad and traveling?
Yeah. So that's kind of, I think, partially what I would think of as what spurred me to sort of take the path that I'm on today. I think, at the very least, just being on your own at 16, halfway around the world, it's kind of a sink or swim scenario. And I felt fortunate that, far from feeling nervous or I don't know, like crumbling under the weight of not being near the corner store near my house, I was actually sort of totally enlivened by it. And I think also it was just an important sort of humbling experience for me because, I part of what was so incredible to me was I was studying literature there. So I think I was moved by the history that I could study, I could study Joyce and, read Oscar Wilde and then go to the places that they went in Dublin or they wrote about in Dublin. So that was moving for me. And I guess that's also the first time that I really honed in on the fact that I really enjoy the feeling of displacement. I really like to, I like to sort of, to use a metaphor, to kind of blow up the raft and head down the river and just see what rapids come. But it's, it's a lot better than floating on a stream that you've gone down 1,000 times. And I think that's, for me, what I realized right then and there was that I quickly understood that probably my growth and my development in life was going to come from putting myself in situations where I wasn't necessarily comfortable, but I was, deeply curious about and intrigued by.
Yes. At 16, I was hanging out at the mall, having a boyfriend, not doing, just doing high school teenage stuff. But I love that at this young age that you were able to visit another country, visit Ireland. So talk to us a little bit about that writing program. Like, has writing always been part of your story at a young age? Like, how did that program how did you start with that program in Dublin?
Yeah. So really it was a specific program to study Irish authors at Trinity College, but for all intents and purposes, there was an organization that allowed Canadian students to come abroad and spend some time in Dublin and some time in Cork, and it would count as a high school credit essentially in English towards university. So I was keen on that, but I was even more keen on the aspect of studying Irish authors in Dublin, but also there was a heavy focus on, not just sort of the what I previously understood from English lit, like the sort of the scholastic sort of read this and then talk about it sort of way. There was also an emphasis on some creative writing and the power of writing itself. And it's also where I discovered that I might have a knack for this whole writing thing. And it sounds like so, I don't know, cliche and stereotypical, but I did spend a lot of time, reading passages from the Dubliners by Joyce, and then going and tracing some of those steps, or passages from Ulysses or whatever. It was just fascinating to me. So that's kind of the crux of it. It was sort of equal parts study and writing, but ultimately it counted towards it was essentially a high school credit for me as well.
Yeah, I love that. I definitely see like the link between travel, writing, and now what you do professionally. So let's go a little bit deeper and fast forward to you moving abroad for the first time. So how did that decision come about?
I think honestly, I think you were really apt to ask that question about Ireland first, because that planted a lot of seeds for me. And I decided that, I think for one reason or another, the way that travel is pitched to us in society is sort of like it's something that you can partake in when you're not partaking in real life. It's like everybody saves up so that they can go and travel somewhere to forget about all of the whatever's going on in their quote unquote real life. And I think I quickly realized that travel and work for me, or just life in general, there could be a really healthy symbiosis there. And so I decided that I was going to study abroad for at least 1 year of my university. And so I moved abroad to Oslo, Norway, for part of my third year of university. And that was a fantastic experience. I ended up staying in the old Olympic villages, which with 10,000 other international students. And that was a tremendous opportunity for growth and learning there. So that was the first time after Ireland that I didn't really move abroad to Ireland as much as sort of dip my pinky toe into the water. But the first time I actually moved abroad would have been to study at the University of Oslo for my third year.
Yes, I love that. Again, these are things that a lot of us wish we would have done. Like for me personally, I wanted to study abroad in Paris, but the finances of like not having the financial aid package definitely held me back from doing that. And to be honest, like I did not do enough venturing off. Like I did not try hard enough to make it happen. But I love that in your story that you dipped your pinky toe in the beginning in Ireland, and then you went full fledged and you're like, okay, I'm going to spend a year in a different country, and Oslo was your country of choice. So I know that between 2014 and 2017, you lived in Istanbul. Can you talk about that decision, why Turkey, and a little bit about what life was like there?
Sure. Yeah. So just to give a timeline there, in between Oslo and Istanbul, my wife Bree and I went to Seoul and taught English for a year, and then we moved back to Toronto, and then we shipped off to Istanbul for what would have been our longest time abroad, which was 3 years. And I think Istanbul called to us just because I think there's when I'm looking for a place to live, I'm looking for a place that has sort of a lot of growth potential. And for me, that means that like, I love places where, I know that I could live there for 3 years, and every single weekend there'd be things that I'm looking to do there to further dive into what makes that place special. And so Istanbul was calling my name in that regard. We first went to Istanbul, Bree and I, in 2010, actually, after I left Oslo. Bree came and met me in Europe, and we traveled around a little bit and went to Istanbul, and we fell in love with the city, despite going there in the summer when it was like incredibly humid. My like my life as a Canadian male just like crumbled. I was like sweating and like it was terrible. But I realized later that the summer is just like it's especially hot, and the rest of the year is perfect because you don't get barraged for 3 months with a soul defeating winter like you do in Toronto. Um, so, anyways, we taught at an international school, both of us, and actually, we'll get into this a little bit more later about sort of the idea that you can grow while you're traveling. But we actually, while we were teaching there, we actually got our master's through a Buffalo State in education. So that was another growing, like, it's just something that I think I just if there's one thing I want to sort of really hone in on, it's the fact that traveling abroad, in some sense, and living abroad, people can see it sometimes as a backward step or a side step, but really, it can be a tremendous step forward. And I think we came back from Istanbul very well prepared for life in Toronto, and it certainly wasn't a back step for us, but. We can dive into Istanbul a little bit more, but for anyone who's been, it's a tremendous city, a really humbling city, because it's one of those places that, you can have the best day and worst day of your life in the same week, but you'll certainly never be bored. And that suits me very well.
Yes, Istanbul is definitely on my list. So, if someone is considering moving abroad, you mentioned that you visited Istanbul first before you decided that this was the move that you wanted to make. Is that something that you would recommend to folks, or would you recommend to just figure out if this is the place for you and just go?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the type of person that you are. If you're somebody who's really careful and like didactic about the decisions that you make, you're going to want to look into it a little bit more heavily, maybe go and visit and figure out if it's for you. I personally, I'd never been to Oslo before I moved there, and I'd never been to Seoul before I moved there. I think that can be part of the fun of it. It just depends on the type of person you are. If you're somebody who's sort of adaptable, and you trust yourself to sort of ingratiate yourself with society, you trust yourself to find the flow of the city and to sort of dive into it, then I think you're fine to just go for it. It's important to remember that there's a great quote that says, like, there are no foreign places. It's only the traveler that's foreign. So the idea that we are from a place that's wherever your homeland is, that's your spot, and then everywhere else is foreign. It's not true. I mean, really, like I always say that your home, like, home is not a place, it's a concept. So you can go and find your home somewhere else. I mean, I felt at home in Istanbul and Seoul and Oslo and a number of other places. And so I think just know your character. If you need to go and visit a place before you'll feel comfortable living there, then sure. But it also depends on the place too, right? Like, you can probably have a reasonable idea of what living in London, in the UK is going to be like. So you might be fine to just dive into that, but you might not be as sure about Tbilisi, Georgia, or something like that. So, but I mean, when, like, my philosophy, and this is just me, is that, ultimately, you've got to take chances to get rewards in life. And if an opportunity presents itself and you haven't been there and you still want to go, I would not let that stop you.
Yes. And that is exactly for me why I'm so passionate about travel, because in the past, when I was younger, I let so many opportunities pass me by. So I decided to myself, like, I'm not going to not at least try my best as an adult. So I love those thoughts. Now, I know also from doing a bit of research about you that while you were in Istanbul, you were also playing sports professionally. So can you talk a bit more about getting your master's, playing sports professionally in Istanbul? So all the things that you did to help you grow as a person and also professionally.
Well, firstly, good on you for doing research.
Oh, I'm
I
on
don't,
it. I am on
yeah,
it.
like I'm pretty impressed. I don't think anybody's ever brought that up in an interview before. So, big kudos. All the listeners need to know that you're working hard for this show. That's fantastic. um, so yeah, I think it's sort of all of these, like everything in life, once you do commit yourself to something, opportunities tend to just sort of arise and come up. And the master situation was something where we actually went to a school where we knew that this was going to be an opportunity for us. So they had a professor coming over from Buffalo State 10 times over our 3 years for 10 1 week intensive courses with corresponding work around that. I think it was really important for Bree and I to come back with that master's from an internet, like an institution that where we'd have a master's that was recognized internationally. And so that was a decision that we made. That was part of the decision we made to go to that school, to teach at that school, was part of that program. So that was very intentional. The playing professional sports was less intentional. Literally, I was out at a bar in Istanbul one night, which, yeah, I mean, I should mention, despite the fact that, of course, Istanbul at large is a Muslim country, Istanbul is a great city to go out. So figure that one out. But I think it's anyways, it's a really fun spot. I was out one night, and a friend came over to me, and he was like, "So, Chris, like, you're Canadian. You must have played hockey growing up." And I was like, I resent you for that, but yes, I absolutely did. And he's like, "Were you good?" And I was like, "Yeah, I played competitive hockey." And he was like, "Okay, so like I'm partially involved with a team here in Istanbul, and I'm like helping to coach the team. Would you be interested in coming out and skating for a session?" I was like, "Okay, sure." So I went out. I went out and borrowed some equipment, which was like not the best equipment, but I managed to play all right. And my parents were happy to be coming over at the start of the season anyways to visit. So I said, to mom and dad, just, hey, bring the hockey equipment when you come over here. So I, signed on with a team called the Koç Rams, and ended up playing 2 seasons in the Turkish Super League. So that was great because I'd be teaching during the week, and then I would hop on a plane with bring my hockey equipment to the airport, hop on a plane with the guys. And we would go to, all these places I might not have gone, like Erzurum, and spend time in Izmir and a whole bunch of other places. And yeah, that was a tremendous experience. But, if you want to put a big check mark beside why travel, I'm certainly not playing professional hockey in Canada. So that was fantastic.
I love that. And it brings me back to me a couple of years ago. I was invited to dance professionally as a step dancer on this professional team. And I did it for like a year. So it's interesting that like you could have short stints of doing something really unique. And I love that for you, while you were in a different country, you were able to play professionally. So that is super duper cool. All right. So let's now talk about money, which is our favorite subject. So in your opinion, how did living abroad set you up for financial success?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of things that come into play there. I think for one thing, living abroad, a lot of the success of living abroad, and this is sort of like a broad sort of macro statement, but I think a lot of the success of living abroad is arriving in a place, understanding sort of what cards you have in your hand, recognizing trends, and figuring how to best fit in to that mold. And to me, that's kind of like, a little bit like the stock market, or a little bit like finances in general. I mean, I think those skills, the idea of being tempered, being in a potentially chaotic situation, but maintaining that same level of breath, looking at situations critically and taking a moment to understand things. All of these skills, I think, honestly, that you have when you're traveling. And I'm not talking about being on a tour, what I call the sort of that circle of tourism where you're just sort of brought onto a conveyor belt of travel. I'm talking about like, you're really going to explore a place and live somewhere. I think a lot of these skills are transferable. And I think the big things that I would just sort of highlight are you need to really trust your instincts. And I think the same is true for finances as well. You're on a mission to learn as much as you can, take in all that information, and then make decisions and judgments based on all that you know. But it's always about the search of, you never are complacent. You never, rest your laurels. You keep going and learning more. So on a macro level, I can get into obviously the specifics of how, a little bit later about how travel, I've actually been able to churn that out to income and so on and so forth. But I just wanted to talk on a macro level first about a lot of those skills of going abroad and taking a leap and trusting your instincts, being adaptable, being analytical. I think a lot of those things transfer well into looking at the financial world.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely for sure. Especially the aspect of taking risks and taking calculated risks, understanding what are the pros and cons of making this move. And I definitely see how that translates to running a business and being an entrepreneur and doing things like that. So I know a lot of people who end up teaching abroad, they get their housing paid for, their maybe stipends. So was that the case for you? And did you have a strategy in terms of how you were going to save money and build wealth while you were in Turkey?
Yeah. So, that's exactly the case there. So we taught at a school in Istanbul that was one of the top schools in the city and really in the country. So we had a really competitive salary, and we had a few things that we were looking for. So for one, we were prioritizing teaching opportunities where we were going to be paid in US dollars. I think if you are going to be teaching abroad, part of what you need to look at is the stability of a country. And I think you don't necessarily want your salary tethered to a currency which fluctuates really heavily. And so in our case, we went to a great school. We absolutely loved it. They didn't take care of our housing, but provided we ended up renting our apartment, a beautiful 3-bedroom apartment in central Istanbul from a former employee from the school. So that was sort of well taken care of during sort of orientation or orienting ourselves to the city. And then we were paid in US dollars there. So that ended up being really advantageous because from 2014 to 2017, part of what we feared occurred, which was that the lira, I think when we arrived, the lira was sort of like 2-1. When we left, it was 4 or 5-1, maybe. I can't exactly remember, but either way, we were making US dollars. So actually our salary it was hard to leave after 2017 because we were actually ended up doing very well. And that's just one thing I would recommend is just look historically at wherever you're going to be going. Look at the nations historically. How much does that currency fluctuate? So that's just one thing to consider. But that was our arrangement, and it ended up working out very well for us.
That's a wonderful, wonderful tip, and something I think that a lot of us who are thinking about getting jobs abroad should definitely consider, making sure that whichever currency you get paid in, it's stable over time and not fluctuating like the currency that was in Turkey at the time. So that's very good. Thank you, Chris, for sharing that with us. So in terms of your budget when you were abroad, did you have saving goals that you wanted to have? Did you find that cost of living was affordable in Turkey at that time?
Yeah, so we didn't have a formal budget in the sense of, we were going to be saving this much per month, just because Turkey's in general is very inexpensive. And I would also point out that, if you're going to be traveling a lot, basing yourself in a travel hub like Istanbul is really a good idea for saving money. So, for example, Istanbul, they just built, I think, the largest airport in the world. That's the hub of Turkish Airlines. So you're able to fly out of Istanbul, I think usually round trip for under $100 to most places, within, a reasonable distance, of course. But it was extremely inexpensive, especially if you're used to North American prices on flights. It just really was less expensive to live in Istanbul because the cost of living was really not bad at all. But it was also less expensive to travel because that huge cost that's usually associated with travel is the flight, and that was really negligible because we lived in a real travel hub. And generally speaking, if you're looking for the hub, figure out where the airport or where the airline's really basing their headquarters. So like I think Lufthansa and Frankfurt, that kind of stuff, like basing yourself near a hub is going to be a smart idea. So that's part of that decision to move there. And part of the way we were able to save money was just simply by we already had that advantage.
Yes, I love that. That's also another thing to definitely consider. And it's always mind-boggling to me. And I know Canada has it even worse, the United States, that the prices of flights are just so expensive intra the country versus going internationally, which is probably why I go to Europe more often than I visit anywhere in the North America. So I could totally understand and relate to that. So behind the scenes, you were continuing to write. Is that true? For example, you're writing for publications behind the scenes. So can you talk a little bit more about your writing journey while you were traveling also while you were in Turkey?
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, just to back it up, I started travelingmitch.com when I was living in Oslo, actually. And I think at that time I was calling the blog Oh So Oslo or something like that. And
I like the name, by the way. That's cool.
Yeah, not bad. And then I think when I moved to Seoul, I changed it to Heart and Soul, spelled Soul. But I just started it honestly because I've said this elsewhere before. I started it because I was getting emails from all sides from family and friends, and I just wanted a central place to send everybody, just to send them a link. At that time, it was much more of a personal journal. But when I moved to South Korea, I actually applied for this opportunity, sort of ad hoc. I didn't really think I was going to get it, but I was eventually selected as a World Korea blogger by the Korean government. So I was one of 30 people around the world who was writing about Korean culture there, and they were doing a good job of promoting my site and all of this kind of stuff. And it just ended up being really, getting my site on the map. And that's when I sort of thought, okay, I can do something with this. When I left Korea, I just continued to chase opportunities in print, going on press trips for Canadian magazines. I love writing. I mean, writing is sort of the way I process the world. I've always been somebody. I mean, you can probably gather already. I'm always balancing 1,000 different things, and that's the way I like it in life. But writing is my time it's like meditation for me. Like I turn on my music, I sort of close my door, and I get into a zone. There's like that. I'm not sure if you've heard of the term flow state, where like you get into a flow state where the hours sort of just sort of pass through your hand like sand in a really positive way. And that's kind of been writing for me forever. In Turkey, I was kind of presented with a special opportunity because I was, on the inside, there was a lot of turbulence, we'll say. There was some bombings and things going on. It was a tense time. And I think I ended up being, I was celebrating an engagement party, and I was at the top floor of a apartment in Taksim Square, or hotel in Taksim Square. And we witnessed kind of a major bombing happen outside Beşiktaş Stadium, called Vodafone Stadium, actually. And I ended up writing an article about it, just talking about how I was sort of torn for my love of this place and my pride for the city and the resilience of the Turkish people, mixed with my own safety and when it's time to pull a plug and get out of a place like that. And that article ended up winning an award at the Traverse Awards in 2019, last year. So writing was the way I processed through that. And I think for anyone looking to travel to Istanbul now, it's for all that I understand, it's totally fine to go over there. I don't want to paint a picture of it being a dangerous place. We stayed for the full 3 years, obviously. But as far as that journey goes, I mean, obviously then, I'm so kind of focused and in love with that writing aspect that I decided that, when we were leaving Istanbul, I was going to chase this full time, and that blossomed into a whole bunch of other stuff, which we can talk about later. But I think the crux of it for me is that I knew that when I was traveling, going through all these experiences, I didn't want to do what's so common now, which is sort of take 1,000 pictures that I'm almost not even present in the moment. I'm just sort of like taking pictures and posting them and so on and so forth. I really felt like the way that I could ensure that I created long-lasting memories and lessons for myself was to write about it. And so that's kind of where the blog came in. And then of course now it's come from that back in the day, sort of that Oslo, here's my personal journal, to really trying to go from, I think that style of writing now, like, look how great my life is, look where I am, it's kind of alienating. So now I'm really looking to hit that second person pronoun, the you, and make sure that I'm empowering other people with the site, with some of my travel advice. So yeah, that's the long answer, which of course you're going to get from a writer.
It sounds like in your journey of being a blogger, you had things in your path that were validating, like winning that opportunity to be part of the 30 writers in Seoul. Can you talk a little bit more about how there might be things in your journey that will validate you and that will push you to make decisions like taking your blog full time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's actually a really good question and point, and it's something I think a lot about. The first thing I would say is that I think just in general in the society we live in, it can be dangerous to fall into the trap of always looking for external validation, because I think we're kind of trained to do that. At the same time, you need to know that things are working in some way and things are resonating. So obviously, I was a little younger and I got that opportunity with the Korean government. I knew that there was a kernel of something that I had. And I think when I think about other people, if other people are listening, they're trying to create something, I think, my advice would be to take that kernel of what you know to be true, that you have something special, and then hold on to that tightly and sort of use that to hurdle over the opportunities ahead, or the lack thereof. And what I mean by that really is that, it's really easy to hop on a podcast or whatever and to talk about all your highlights, but you're going to get 1,000 no's in the process. And I think people ought to talk more about those no's. I mean, it's never going to be a linear path. It's always going to be a lot of ups and downs. And I think the main thing is to remember why you're doing it. And that's where I think a lot of people struggle now. If you created, if you're creating a brand or content only for the monetary side of things, you might be in trouble. Now, of course, you should have some business acumen and be smart and think about how can you monetize it, but monetization can't be the crux of your purpose.
Yes, that is gold. That's gems, because it is a long, long and hard journey, like you mentioned, Chris. So I can totally relate to that. So I think for me as a content creator, travel content creator, it hit me that travel, like when I'm traveling and then I write about it or create content, I can actually monetize my travel. And it's hard to say when that monetization will come. But the more I travel, the more I create content, the more I'm able to monetize my stories and my skills and my craft. So when did you realize that travel could be a revenue driver for you?
Yeah, I think it was really just when I realized that all my passions were sort of colliding. So writing and travel and photography and all of this kind of stuff. And I think also it's the idea of like, there are these opportunities out there. Whatever you're interested in, there are going to be opportunities out there. So I knew that I was passionate about writing and travel and photography. And it was really just about slowly but surely sort of getting that validation to know that I could do it. And once you do it once, and then, if anyone's looking for an actual example of this, like everything I did and have done, I just sort of continue to add to my portfolio page. And it's at travelingmitch.com/portfolio. And literally that is my page of validation. So, if I'm ever feeling down, I just go there and I'm like, all right, I've been busy, but I think you start small, start measured. So I think the first article that I had for a print magazine was a magazine in Seoul called 10 Magazine, and I wrote about comedy clubs in Seoul. So you start small, and then you get larger and larger and set your heights higher and higher. So I think from the freelance writing side of things, I think probably people can understand how that works. It's not quite as lucrative as it used to be, for sure. But I think the other side of that is figuring out, monetizing your website and your brand. That's something which is, I think it's probably never been easier to do, but it's also never been harder to get in front of people. And so that's where you would want to learn things like search engine optimization and things like that. And we can talk a little bit about that. But I think as far as travel as a revenue driver, what I'm thinking about now is that each place I travel to is an opportunity to gather content, which then I can sort of put into a myriad of channels. And so that could be, and in some cases, it's just the idea of gathering content for future opportunities. So there's been plenty of times where, having an organized media library so that when I see an opportunity to write for a magazine, I can quickly be like, oh, funny you mention whatever, Kazbegi, Georgia. I was just there recently, and I have plenty of shots from the top of the mountain or whatever it is. Like, keep organized. And I think it's a bit of a mind shift, right? Like, and it works really well, because when you start to go places like you're an investigative journalist almost, and you're trying to uncover everything, then you have a deeper experience there anyways. So the worst case scenario is you go and you take the pictures you need, you explore and do your due diligence, you eat at the right places, you eat all the food you need to, and then you don't write about it, but you still had a more meaningful travel experience.
Yes, which is always good. It's always fun. Sometimes it's not every trip I go on ends up being content. But I love the idea that you said, like, always having, especially if you're a content creator, having a media library or having a library of content that you have. And sometimes you'll just pull the trigger later on. Like, sometimes I get opportunities to talk about a country that I visited 5 years ago, but I have the notes, I have the, the photos, and I have the memories of that experience, so I can bring it kind of quote unquote out of the closet. So I love that you're able to do that as well. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the skills that you have been able to leverage as you are traveling. And again, like on this podcast, we really try to debunk the myth that, like, you don't need money to travel. So while you are spending money to travel, can you talk about some of the skills that you have been able to leverage and grow over time?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I think the first thing to mention when you're looking at that is that, if you're going to be an authority on something, like travel or whatever, a good travel writing needs to take into account, a broad picture of the world, right? Like, you can't keep writing about the places that everyone else has written about. You need to understand what's really out there and what is valuable around the world. Like, for me, I feel comfortable writing in a confident tone about travel experiences because I know that I've done my due diligence to visit 80 countries and live in, 4 or 5. So I feel like I can speak with confidence about certain things. Before, quite honestly, when I was living in Korea, I could speak about my life in Seoul fairly well, but I couldn't necessarily speak about travel in general with that confidence. So I think just on a very basic level, and this is really applicable to even beyond travel or whatever it is. I mean, I think you need to understand that your confidence in your voice is going to come from experience. And so that's why it's so important to continue to travel, and then leverage that voice. So in my opinion, we've come to a place now where there are a lot of people who they decide they want to do something. They want to start a podcast on whatever. They want to start whatever they're doing, and they go from zero to expert in a second. And it doesn't work that way. You need to build yourself towards that, and you need to see a path that's led towards expertise. Some of the skills, obviously, just like continuing to practice writing. The more you write, the better you get. I think you can never underestimate reading. I read every single night. I read typically 60, 65 books a year. And these are all things that but it's all about and yeah, if you want to break it down to the nitty gritty, I mean, I think. You're just making sure you have, I say no 0 days, every day you're working towards something, you're getting better. But, as far as travel writing, just specifically comes into play. I think the big thing I want to hit upon is just that the more you do something, the more confidence you have, and then the more you can really double down on your voice, right? Because we've never been more inundated with voices from all corners. So you need to make sure that when somebody goes and reads your one article, that they're intrigued, or when they listen to one episode, that they can't help but wonder what else you've done, because and then they find that voice everywhere, and then that voice is solidified across your brand. And you want that voice to permeate everything you do. So I think, I've touched on a number of things there, but I think you probably get what I'm getting at.
Yes. Okay. So, I'm getting chills over here because you're speaking truth. And it's really hard to find content creators who are talking about like what it really takes, not the get 1,000 subscribers in 2 months, no, this conversation is like, it really takes practicing in a public eye, to be honest, and having those wins, getting those validations, but also there will be times where you will stumble and fall. So those for me resonate so much. And I think about my own personal journey. I never saw myself as a writer. I did not have support in terms of like thinking that I was going to be a writer, but I started my blog and it was super crappy in the beginning. But like 5 years later, I'm writing book number 2. So I definitely understand what you're saying there. And I feel like we're definitely kindred spirits because we're like 0 days. Like whenever I look at you, I'm like, he's working so hard. So
It's funny. It's so funny you mentioned that because I think the same thing about you. When of course you follow other people. And I think when you're at this for long enough, you shift into a mindset of really, you want to honor other people and you want to support them as best you can. And it's not about, there's room for everyone. There's not about competition anymore. Right. So it's like, I just wanted to come, I totally see the same thing with you, but it takes work, right? Like, and I'm always struck by that notion that like, there is no perfect, right? You just try and get better every day and do your thing. And all of a sudden you hope that you know a thing or two. But it's that fine balance between being confident with what you know already and being humbled enough to know you have to learn more tomorrow.
Exactly. So for folks who really want to take the leap and become content creators, not even content creators full time, but just want to start getting out there and putting their voice out there and creating content, what would be some tips and recommendations for those who want to get started?
Yeah, so there's a number of things that come to mind for me when I think about that, and I think the first thing is just to be patient. Blogging in particular is a long game. I think of it as sort of like the nest for your brand, and then you can sort of fly out from there. But I think ultimately, you're right. Like we're inundated with these sort of like ads. Or whatever on Facebook where it's like, in 30 days, do this or whatever. And I'm a really strong believer that there are no shortcuts in life, that you get what you earn, you get what you put into things. And so I think the main thing is to be patient. The other thing is, too, exactly what you were talking about is that, at the start, it's not going to be great. But like, that's okay too. One thing I would just say, just like people are desperate for authenticity and for realness. And so actually, in a way, if you start off and you're like, look, I'm trying this out, I'm vulnerable, I'm going for it, you might actually find that people hop on that journey with you. And when you get to the top of that mountain, you'll have found that, a whole bunch of people were climbing it with you because they want to see that vulnerability. So, in fact, starting something and being vulnerable and saying, hey, I'm starting this, and not pretending like you've been doing it for a million years, like that can be a huge, huge bonus for you. And I think, beyond just being patient and things like that, I would say be intentional. Make sure you know what you're trying to create. And for me, that would be if you're going to start a blog, make sure you learn about SEO. You can probably learn the basics of SEO in a weekend, take a course. I know I haven't talked about this at all, but I co-founded the Toronto Bloggers Collective where we're helping Toronto content creators, and we ran an SEO course, and all of this, it doesn't take that long to get onto it. You just need to have that in your mind. I would say kind of two more things. One is make sure you are working towards establishing that brand voice. You don't need to have it right away, but you need to be experimenting with it. So like do some A/B testing. I mean, and I don't mean that in a way of like, multiple personality disorder where you have 5 different people and you're trying out like angry Chris and excited Chris, you know what I mean? Like what I mean is that you need to figure out what part of yourself resonates with other people. What are people clinging on to that's authentically you? Because truthfully, it's too long of a journey if you're pretending to be somebody else for your whole life. So figure out what part of you, authentically you, can you share with everybody that will resonate with people. So that's that establishing the brand voice thing. And the final thing I would say is find your community, find your people. It's incredible. Again, like I'm not just trying to promote the Toronto Bloggers Collective here, but I want to just talk about, when I moved back to Toronto, I couldn't find the community I was looking for. And so I was inspired to create it along with 3 other amazing people. And it's wild because outside of that space, I think we're all taught to be so, so confident and we're so polished and whatever. And then you get in that group and you realize there's all these people who are yearning to be vulnerable and being like, I don't know what to do, but like, the brand I've set up, I'm supposed to know everything. So I think it's about find the community, find the people who are looking to support you. And I always say this about the TBC. It's just like, you got to have that rising tide mentality, right? Like you're not a bunch of ships on the water at war. You're a rising tide. You rise together. That's the way I feel about it.
And by the way, I'm the honorary American in Toronto Bloggers Collective, and I love the community that you guys formed together. And I was there at the beginning. I remember when we were at TBEX in Finger Lakes, and you guys were just talking about the idea and getting things started. So all the things that Chris talked about are so, so, so important on your journey to becoming content creators, because there are hard skills that you need, like writing and search engine optimization and photography or whatever you're focusing on. But there's also the other aspect of having a community, having support systems and sanity. You're having a peace of mind while you're creating content and not getting discouraged. I see so many people get discouraged if they're not moving fast enough, or if something that used to work for the past 3 years stops working, So as a content creator, I think it's important to be really dynamic and to move with the tides, to look ahead at the trends and to see how you can continue to, do your craft. So those are my thoughts. Now, these are the final 2 questions, Chris. You've been dropping so many gems for us, but what are some of the common ways that you found that people are making money with a travel blog?
Yeah, so I'm happy to dive in a little bit here, and these are things I talk about, at conferences and stuff like that, and I try to share. Like, I think anybody who knows me knows that I'm an open book. I want to share everything I know. I'm not one of these people that's like, I give one tip and then I'm like, and you can find out more when you buy my ebook on my site. Like, I think you're the same way, right? Like I feel like knowledge breeds knowledge. You know what I mean? And I feel like when I drop some knowledge and I'm sharing with somebody feels more inclined to be like, hey, I'm really good at Pinterest. Do you want to talk about that? And whatever it is. Anyways, just for things to think about for people. I mean, I think you've got some basics. So your affiliate marketing is something you should be thinking about. Obviously, naturally, I'm going to write about hotels and sometimes. So having a affiliate, being in the Booking.com affiliate program makes a lot of sense for me. Most bloggers are going to want to think about being an Amazon affiliate. I recommend a lot of books, travel books, so on and so forth. So Amazon makes sense. Now, these are not huge income streams for me, but I'm a big believer in why wouldn't you put forth the effort to develop some passive income? It just makes sense. Beyond that, like sponsored content, I mean, this is something you need to be a little bit careful with as far as just making sure you're disclosing that if it's sponsored content, but there is money there to be made. That's especially true for like the food niche and things like that. I've seen this done really poorly and I've seen it done really well. So just make sure that if you're going to be doing sponsored content, for one, you're clearly disclosing that at the top of your post, and 2, that your sponsored content is not sort of combating what you stand for in your brand and is in line with your brand voice. Beyond that, ad networks, Ezoic, Google AdSense, Mediavine. I think most people would agree that Mediavine is the place to go, but you need 25,000 unique views to get there. So that's another thing to consider. And I'm just going to keep dropping these right now, and people can put it in slow-mo and write down a list if they want. But paid press trips are a thing that I prioritize. That's something where I developed a relationship with a tourism organization who knows that I bring value, and they know that I'm going to be on the ground creating social content that can stand alone and stand the test of time. And then I'm creating SEO friendly content that's going to make sure that when people are searching for particular things for a tourism board, that they that's hitting the mark for them. And one thing I think is true is that as the traditional media industry is morphing in some respect, I think a lot of tourism boards, brands, organizations, they had some fairly serious budget for one print ad in a large scale magazine, and now they're sort of shifting that into different avenues. So I think there's a lot of opportunity right now. Definitely, coaching and public speaking. When you develop your brand big enough, you have an opportunity to go out there, and I find, for me, that's usually worth it, because it's not necessarily that anything comes of it. It's just that maybe you have one conversation afterwards with one person who's really intrigued, and that leads to other opportunities. Beyond that, I would just say ebooks are that's something I've explored and something you've explored as well. For me, it was mostly just a brand builder. I like to be able to, if I'm speaking in Toronto, I like to be able to say I'm the author of a local travel writer's guide to Toronto. I just think that is it also shows that I have that patience and I am intentional. All those things we talked about being a strong content creator, it shows that I'm willing to put that time in. And as well as I do, it is a grind to create an ebook that you can be proud of. But it's also, if you're looking at, income streams, I have a reasonably robust email marketing strategy, and you better believe my ebook is sprinkled in there. So that's another passive income stream for me. Although creating it was anything but passive. Yeah. And then, beyond that, I do some podcasting, not necessarily a revenue driver, but it's something I really enjoy. It just brings a lot of light and energy back into my life. I have another podcast, which I'm launching somewhat soon. And then I guess finally, just now I'm in a position as a community leader with the Toronto Bloggers Collective, where we're organizing events, we're sourcing press trips, and we're getting money flowing. Not just about money for me now. It's about we're bringing money back into the community. So that's a bigger goal. That's a 2020 goal. But we're sort of hitting our mark. I think we're changing the narrative a little bit. We're kind of like a mixture of we're serving content creators, but we're playing the role of a PR firm a little bit in the opportunities that we're sourcing for people. So that's also exciting. But I think those are just all ideas. I wanted to just throw all those ideas out there for everybody who's thinking about things. And if that's overwhelming to you, I think the biggest thing to do is just start off creating good quality content. And then look at adding in some of those sort of affiliate links and getting onto the ad networks. You can also, of course, sell spots on your social media. And I'd be careful about this, just because sometimes I go to a feed and I see somebody who's every single post. It's just yeah, it's gotten so out of hand, right? Where it's I was hiking the other day and I twisted my ankle, and it's good thing I had icy hot packs or whatever. And you're come on.
Just so happened to have an icy pack.
Yeah, good thing I had one frozen and ready for me. And you're this is getting ridiculous.
Yes.
So you want to be careful with that, and that's actually I think that's a good way to wrap up those recommendations. Is there's gonna be a million opportunities for you to make money, but the thing is, you can always make money, but you can't get back your integrity. So don't sell your integrity at the beginning for a little bit of money. You got to have it's a long-term game. There's plenty of ways you can make money, but you can cross out the coaching and the speaking and people wanting to buy your ebook if you don't have integrity to go along with that, because you've sold your brand for the lowest bidder.
Yes. And one of the big things I took away from that, Chris, is that as you're building your portfolio and you're building yourself as a content creator, it's like a pie. And there are just so many ways that you could split the pie. And the great thing is that you can decide like what's the way that you are going to drive income. And being like ethical and making sure that you stay true to your values, but it's really your decision. And you could dip in drabs, and not everything is going to make you so much money. But depending on the avenues that you pick, it could really, for example, like having a book could really position you as an expert and a leader, which could lead you to more income opportunities down the road. So that was super helpful.
Yeah, I just wanted to say based on that, I think that's really apt but it just struck something, the way I think about it. You've probably noticed by now, I think in metaphors. It's just like, I can't help it. Like my wife's always making fun of me for it, but I just, I can't help it. But I think about all this kind of stuff as like you're planting seeds, right? And so you should plant as many seeds as you can that align with, your quote unquote garden, right? And you have to understand that some of those things are going to grow. They're really going to grow. And sometimes it's the plant you don't expect that's going to grow like crazy, but you need to keep planting seeds. And, to extend that metaphor even deeper, sometimes you're not going to get the weather you want, but it doesn't mean the seed's not good. It just means the sun's not shining yet.
Whew, that was good. That's an amen. Yes, I agree. I totally agree. It's so funny. I just tweeted this the other day. I was like, March is time to sow those seeds, to reap those seeds, because I felt like I've been planting seeds for months now. So I can totally understand where that comes from.
The sun's coming.
The sun is coming. I mean, spring's coming down the road. So exactly. I can't wait. Chris, this has been incredible. We can talk for hours about content creation. Thank you so much for your time. Let everyone know how they can connect with you and about the Toronto Bloggers Collective as well.
Yeah, sure. So you can find me at travelingmitch.com and Traveling Mitch on social media. I'm particularly active on Twitter, as you know. Like, I just love Twitter. That's my space. I also have another website that's a niche Ontario travel website. I don't know if anyone's gonna be interested in that, but if you're coming to Ontario, we got your back. ultimateontario.com and Ultimate Ontario on social media. Of course, if you're based in Toronto, the Toronto Bloggers Collective, we're always looking for bright content creators. You don't need to be a blogger. We just say, like, you know what? If you're creating something interesting, we got your back. Beyond that, I got my podcast, Rick Steves Over Brunch, where we are kind of funny enough just reviewing Rick Steves Europe episodes. And Rick, of course, came on the show a couple times, which was pretty epic. Yeah, I mean, I got a lot of stuff that I'm going to be launching in the coming months, but just follow along and you'll see. And obviously, I just want to really thank you for having me on. I knew this would be a good time. Because you do your research. I have a lot of respect for what you're doing. I listen to this podcast. I'm not that guy that goes on 1,000 podcasts and I don't even know who the people are and what you're talking about. I think you're doing a great job. And I watch you from afar, and I definitely see that kindred spirit. So I think everyone's in really good hands, the listeners of this podcast, and I'm just grateful to be part of that. Part of the show as it continues to grow and become better and better.
Thank you, Chris. Chris, I don't know if you remember this, but when I met you the first time was in T-Beck's Finger Lakes, and we were talking, and I think that you were the first person out of everyone who I met in the travel space who was doing this full time and who was like about his business, very focused, very passionate. And again, I'm so inspired by your work, and you were just that person that made me realize, okay, you can have hobbies, but you can also really take it to the next level. So thank you again for coming on today and sharing so much of your knowledge with us.